cost-benefit analysis tries to look at the benefits. The costs are the cost of delivering the program in the first place. If it's a project, it's the cost of building a project in the first place. So those typically are costs at time zero or in the first year or something like that, right? But the benefits, they look out over the full lifetime of the project. With criminal justice, it's interesting because the lifetime of the project is the lifetime of the people who go through the program. So a juvenile offender goes through a program, and over the course of a long life, we hope, and what would have been potentially a long criminal career, we hope, they commit fewer crimes. And that can stretch out for many years. I think in the Washington State analysis, I think it was 13 years that they tried to do the recidivism analysis on. But maybe they even estimated what future crime reductions would be after that. Those of you who've worked with discounted cash flow analysis, time value of money calculations, you know that after a certain while the discount is so high that it doesn't matter so much what the benefits are in those way far out years. But this is sometimes called life cycle costing, and you'll see discussions of it in literature or in government manuals in that sense. And if we were trying to figure out whether to buy a fire engine or not, we would look perhaps at the entire lifetime of use of the fire engine and do this kind of work. Budget people don't do this, or at least they don't always do this, and they don't frequently do this. Budget people have a planning period that they're looking at. In many, many, many governments, the planning period is 1 year, and that's it. And they don't think too much about the next year, some, but not too much. Sometimes it's 2 years, 1 year, and then the full annualized costs in the next year. Or because you have a biennium, in many states, about half the states have biennial budgets. They have budgets every 2 years. In New York City has a 4-year financial plan. But as Michael could tell you better than I do, after the first couple of years, the estimates are pretty mechanical and don't require the same kind of thought and analysis as the first couple of years. So budgets focus on the year coming up that you're doing the analysis for, and then whatever longer time period may be appropriate, but further out with less rigor. And the years beyond that planning period are just simply, from a quantitative and analytic point of view, ignored. That doesn't mean to say that intelligent people don't think about them or don't know that they exist, but they're not part of the analysis. Cost-benefit analysis focuses on projects. I said that before, right? The project or the program. Many budgets and budget shops work around organizational units, and these are sometimes called responsibility center budgets. So the department of whatever, or the bureau of whatever within the department of whatever will be the unit. And that's for good reason, because a lot of what budget offices are trying to do involves management, and this specifies where management control and responsibility is at the head of those responsibility centers. So it's not, they don't do this just to be cranky or because they don't care about programs or something like that. They do it because budget folks are involved in the financial management of the organization. So, but this is a different approach. So if you say, well, the project is, wait a minute, how does this fit into what I'm doing in the departmental budget? So we have a couple of analytic differences here in terms of the units of analysis. Measurement units are different. This is a very powerful one, this first one. So the cost-benefit people come in and say, well, here we've got a positive benefit of $75,000 for this program if you put a juvenile offender through this program. And the budget people will say, well, wait a minute, what does that mean next year? And what does that mean the year after? Because in this year and the next year in my planning period, I'm working in nominal dollars. And they say, well, these are discounted dollars. These are dollars that stretch out for 20 years, and the conversation shuts down. You're done. You're not necessarily totally done, but you're done. Or in the best of circumstances, you get a question, and we're going to come back to this later. The question might be, well, tell us what that means for the years in my planning period. how much can I save, or how much will I be spending during those? At least then they're engaged, and that's a good question. Measurement units. Often, the cost-benefit folks will do regression analysis to try to figure out what the relationship is between changes in the volume or the workload of an organization and its costs. Budget people don't do that when they create expenditure budgets. They do this funny kind of construct, which is they take the base budget and then they adjust it for inflation and workload and then reduce it by things that are in the budget for one-time purposes. And when they're done, they have a new number. But it's a different way of arriving at a number, and it doesn't really fit with the statistical approach very well. There are other ways of looking at and determining the costs associated, and to the extent that that's the case, you can make a little bit more progress in discussions. Cost-benefit people, when they're doing their job well, and they don't always do this right, and it's actually quite difficult, they focus on marginal costs. They focus on the additional costs associated with each, in our world, each additional kid, or each additional crime. That's hard to calculate, right? Budget people usually do average cost. That is, they take the whole cost of the corrections department and divide it by the number of people incarcerated, and they've got an average cost of taking care of a prisoner. That's very different from the savings that you might get from eliminating one prisoner from your census, right? And depending on how you think about that, that might be as little as the food and laundry costs of the prisoner. Usually we can do better than that. We can think about reductions of, 50 or 100 or something like that. But even there, this marginal cost analysis comes up with very different numbers than the average cost. So even when they're saying this is how much it costs to take care of a prisoner and this is how much you'll save, could be very different numbers. Okay. In some ways, those analytic differences can be overcome because a good analyst will listen to the way another good analyst does their work and will think about it. But the broader question can really be, what are the goals? So let's start by laying out the goals of cost-benefit analysis, and then we'll compare those to the goals of budgeting as best we understand them. I said this earlier, right? CBA, you focus on comparing similar projects. Often capital, that was how it started. That's not the way, it's getting broader, and I think the broadening has had a good impact and a good effect. And maximizing social welfare, again, from your micro classes. If that made sense to you in your micro class, then it might make sense to you again if you were doing cost-benefit analysis. If it didn't make sense to you, you were probably headed for a budget office instead of, because it's like, I'm not sure what that means, thank you, but I'm sure it's a good idea, but unless you can explain how it really works, so that means that your metric is social benefits. And social benefits is a big, broad basket of things that are happening, right? You'll see the budget people focus on a much narrower metric. This next quote is from the 1935 Flood Control Act, which rather famously put cost-benefit analysis to work in the world of flood control and started what the federal government believes to be a major thrust in that area. So the project is acceptable if the benefits to whomsoever, I don't think I've ever said whomsoever before, to whomsoever they may accrue are in excess of the estimated costs. Okay, whomsoever, everybody, all of us, landowners, and if we have a choice situation, this is a quote from one of my Kennedy School colleagues, if we have a choice situation, we're going to produce the policy alternative that produces the greatest net benefit, the net social benefit, the highest one, okay? Again, this sounds really plausible and rational, as economists often do. I didn't, there was no spin on that at all. In the budget world, it's different. When Michael and I sat trying to deal with budget projects, we were not the ones who did the ranking of similar projects. At least I wasn't. I mean, if there were a bunch of road projects out there, and I was in state government, I didn't sit there trying to figure out which road project I thought was most important. The Department of Transportation told us what projects they thought were the most important. And then if the governor had a road project that he thought was really important, we crammed it in, right? And that was pretty much it. That was not a job for the budget office. Sometimes it may be different, but historically, budget people are often wary about substituting their judgment for the judgment of the people who actually have to run the programs. And that's a healthy kind of wariness. That you're not doing that. You're not running the programs. You shouldn't be making decisions. Now, again, the big caveat for this is that the concerns of the executive, who is the boss of the budget office, are important to the extent that they understand those concerns, and they are different from what the agency people say. They will try to deal with that and reconcile those, but not their own ideas about what's most important. The goal is budget balance. Now that's quite different from maximizing social benefits. It's, I mean, you can actually figure out when you're done with all your work, revenues minus expenditures equals a positive number. You've balanced the budget, okay? And there is considerably less argument about that, although not no argument, considerably less argument about that than there is argument about whether and under what circumstances you have increased the social benefit in the world. Or in the, so. Now, obviously, that also means that you're not trying to tally up social benefits. That's not what you're doing. You're tallying up savings and costs, revenues and expenditures, savings, but different metrics. And those differences are very important. If you have a set of alternatives which roughly accomplish the same objectives, you pick the least expensive one. You don't pick the one that maximizes net social benefits, in part because you haven't tried to figure out what those are. So the least costly one is probably the one you want. And down here again, social benefits is not an operational concept. We know about expenditures, we know about savings, we have a bunch of other words that mean something to us, but social benefits is not one of them. And frankly, budget people have become very suspicious. I remember, if you'll spare a moment for an anecdote, I remember when I was at the Kennedy School and Bill Clinton got elected, and I remember Bob Reich, who was a professor there at the same time and was about to go off to Washington. He actually hoped he'd go off and be the budget director. It didn't work out. He got to be a cabinet member instead, but he was still thinking like, so he took me out to lunch because he wanted to find out. He said, well, we want to make a lot of investments. And I said, oh, that's a good word, Bob. I said, what does that mean? He says, we have spending programs that we want. I said, that's what I thought, okay? So spending equals investments, at least for Democrats. And to the extent that that's been the case for both conservative and also in New York for Republicans too, because Republicans like to spend as well. And so budget people are suspicious of that. And their assumption is that programs don't really provide much in the way of benefits, and again, the goal is to pick the least expensive one. I remember one of these nice things that Wagner does with Accenture, where we get commissioners and people from the city together, and I remember asking the guy who does the capital budget for the city OMB afterward, I said, well, don't you try to figure out what the potential savings are associated with your capital stuff? He said, no, nobody ever saves money with it. That's probably not true, but it was not important enough for it to be on his screen.